The Great Mongol Empire. They rose from the endless steppes, fierce riders united under one vision. In just 25 years, the Mongols conquered more land than the mighty Roman Empire did in 4 centuries. From Korea to Ukraine, from the frozen plains of Siberia to the warm valleys of southern China, their shadows stretched across the world. At their height, the empire ruled over 17.6 million square kilometers, and their leader, Genghis Khan, left a legacy that still echoes today. It's said that 16 million people alive right now carry his blood, about 8% of all men in Asia. But this empire of power and ambition came with a terrible price. Over 40 million lives were lost, nearly 10% of the world's population at that time. A kingdom built on speed, strategy, and fear, the largest land empire ever to exist in human history. In the 12th century, before the Mongol Empire was born, the vast steppes of East Asia were home to countless Mongol and Turkic tribes, each ruled by their own Khan, their leader and war chief. These people lived as nomads, herding sheep, cattle, yaks, and camels. They dwelled in tents made of animal hides, moving with the seasons between summer and winter camps. Nomadic women held remarkable power. They managed migrations, herds, and trade, while the men specialized in the art of war. But life on the steppe was never peaceful. Tribes constantly raided one another. Small clans became targets for thieves and bandits seeking resources or captives. The endless struggle for grazing land fueled rivalries, and disputes were settled not with words, but with blood. For the Mongols, life was harsh and uncertain. And to the great dynasties of China, these nomads were seen as nothing more than wild barbarians, raiders who attacked caravans and border villages. But everything changed the moment Temujin was born, the man who would one day be known as Genghis Khan. The story truly begins around the year 1162, when Temujin was born into one of the lower Mongol clans. He would later be known as Genghis Khan, the Great Khan. His father was poisoned by enemies, leaving Temujin under the control of his older brother. A brother he would later kill after a bitter argument. Life on the steppe was cruel, and even family could become an obstacle to survival. At 19, Temujin married his beloved wife, Horde. But soon after, she was kidnapped by another tribe. In his daring attempt to rescue her, Temujin proved his courage and skill in battle, and from that moment, he began to rise as a leader among his people. Uniting the Mongols, however, required more than bravery, it required civil war. And Temujin won. He climbed to power by forging strategic alliances and rewarding loyalty. Unlike other Khans, Temujin promoted his warriors based on merit, and shared the spoils of war equally among them. One of his most brilliant moves was scattering rival clans among his own soldiers, ensuring they could never unite against him. These innovations made him unstoppable. By the year 1206, he had united the tribes of the endless steppe and was proclaimed Genghis Khan, the Great Khan of all Mongols. The Mongols followed shamanism, believing that spirits of nature and their ancestors inhabited the world around them. They worshipped Tengri, the eternal blue sky, and Genghis Khan believed it was Tengri's will that he conquer the world in his name. With the nomads of the steppe finally united, that dream seemed within reach. To resist the Mongols was to defy the will of the heavens, and for that, there could be only one punishment: death. After uniting the Mongol tribes, Genghis Khan set his eyes on the world beyond. He struck first at the north, conquering northern China, and then turned westward toward the Islamic lands of Central Asia. His empire was only just beginning. During that time, China was not a single unified empire as we know it today. It was divided into 3 great dynasties: the Tangut in the north, the Jin in the northeast, and the Song, who ruled the prosperous lands of southern China. The Tangut were the first to face the storm. Their territory was closest to Mongolia, and many of their cities lacked the mighty defensive walls that protected other kingdoms. The Mongols had no siege weapons capable of breaking through stone fortresses, and little knowledge of such technology. But they possessed something far more powerful: time. They surrounded cities with their camps, just as their ancestors had surrounded herds on the open steppe for generations. The Chinese defenders were trapped inside, unable to farm, trade, or gather food. While the city starved, the Mongols waited patiently. They could survive anywhere, on the harshest plains or the coldest mountains. To send an army out against them was suicide. For centuries, the Mongols had lived on horseback, hunting and surviving off the land. Their skill made them terrifying archers and warriors. They valued discipline, precision, and intelligence in warfare. One of their most famous tactics was the feigned retreat. They would pretend to flee before a heavy enemy cavalry, drawing them out, exhausting them, and then, with unmatched speed, the Mongols would turn around and strike like a storm. They could control their horses using only their knees, leaving both hands free to shoot arrows, wield swords, and raise shields. This strategy allowed the Mongols to defeat armies much larger and better equipped. They didn't care if a siege took weeks or months. Eventually, every city would fall. The Mongols turned the enemy's walls into their own traps, and the civilized people inside into prisoners of fear. The Tangut were finally forced to surrender, their king pledging loyalty to Genghis Khan. But the Jin were not so fortunate. When the Mongols reached Beijing, they surrounded it for months. Inside the walls, thousands starved. There are even records of desperate people resorting to cannibalism to survive. When the time came, the Mongols entered the city and slaughtered everyone. A year later, a visiting envoy reported that the streets of Beijing were slick with human fat, and mountains of bones lay outside the walls. The Mongols were ruthless. They often destroyed entire cities. To them, prisoners were useless. Feeding captives only wasted resources. Historians estimate that as many as 30 million people may have died during the Mongol invasion of China. But their brutality wasn't just bloodlust, it was psychological warfare. If one city was wiped from the map, the next would surrender without a fight. Terror became their most powerful weapon. Yet Genghis Khan was not a mindless conqueror. He welcomed those who chose to submit. Many nations that surrendered were spared, and some of his most trusted generals had once been his enemies. He preferred victory without needless bloodshed. Before attacking, he would often offer rulers a choice: join the empire peacefully, or face annihilation. The fall of Beijing in 1215 marked a turning point. The Tangut and Jin dynasties had fallen. Only the Song remained, the last to stand against the unstoppable might of the Mongol Empire. But the Mongol Empire was not only about war, plunder, and destruction. After conquering a region, the Mongols often left its internal politics intact, appointing local administrators to govern on their behalf. They allowed all religions to flourish, so long as their leaders prayed for the Khan. Though they captured artists, scholars, and engineers, they deeply valued their skills, relocating them across Asia to continue their work under Mongol rule. One infamous incident changed history. A Mongol envoy sent to Persia, then ruled by the Khwarezmian Empire, was accused of being a spy and executed. Such an insult could not go unanswered. Genghis Khan marched west with 200,000 soldiers to confront the Persian Muslim armies. The Khwarezmian Empire possessed skilled fighters and formidable defenses, but they were no match for the ferocity of the Mongols, who fought like starving beasts unleashed upon the world. The great cities of Samarkand and Bukhara were captured and destroyed. Their devastation was so complete that not even animals were spared. Millions perished during the Mongol invasion of Persia. By the year 1220, the Khwarezmian Empire had vanished from the map. Once fertile lands were left in ruins for centuries, their irrigation systems shattered, their cities turned into dust. And the world learned a terrible lesson: never underestimate the Mongols again. From these campaigns, the Mongols learned to expand their armies by integrating different kinds of soldiers, including Muslim warriors. It was the same in China, where countless ethnicities and cultures coexisted within Mongol camps. Surprisingly, the Mongols were religiously tolerant. Though they followed shamanism and worshipped the spirits of their ancestors, they never forced their beliefs upon others. In their empire, one could see Muslims, Christians, and Buddhists walking side by side under the same banner. The Mongols revived the great trans-Eurasian trade routes, the ancient Silk Road, which had slowed after 1,000 years of use. They protected merchants, encouraged commerce, and taxed it in return for safety, a system later known as the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace. Among the empire's most prized goods were golden brocades, woven with Chinese silk, Tibetan gold, and crafted by artisans from Baghdad. These brocades adorned the clothing of Mongol rulers, draped over their horses, and lined their grand tents with shimmering gold. The Mongols also appreciated Chinese inventions, especially gunpowder, which would later change the course of warfare forever. With most of Eurasia united under one vast rule, trade flourished once again along the Silk Road, supported by an extensive relay system of couriers and horse stations. Maritime trade also thrived, notably the blue and white porcelain that blended Mongol Chinese craftsmanship with cobalt pigments imported from Mongol Persia. To sustain their growing empire, the Mongols needed to control these sources of wealth. And so, their armies moved ever westward, into Europe, conquering the lands of Russia and Ukraine. It seemed that nothing, and no one, could stop their advance. They divided their armies, striking multiple targets at once, ensuring that no enemy could unite against them. The Mongol tide swept across continents, reshaping the world in fire and in order. In the year 1227, Genghis Khan took his final breath. By that time, the Mongol Empire had stretched across an immense territory, from the Caspian Sea to the China Sea, bordered in the north by the Great Siberian Forests, and in the south by the mountains of Pamir, Tibet, and the central plains of China. After his death, a Kurultai, or General Assembly of Mongol nobles, was summoned to elect a new great Khan according to ancient tradition. Hochi, Genghis Khan's eldest son and rightful heir, had died 6 months earlier, and while the Mongols usually followed the law of primogeniture, Chagatai, the next eldest son, was passed over. Ultimately, Ogedei was chosen as the new great Khan. As expected from the bloodline of Genghis Khan, Ogedei proved to be a powerful and capable ruler. Under his leadership, the Mongols completed the 40-year conquest of the Song dynasty in southern China and fully subjugated Korea. After that, the Mongol armies continued their advance into Europe, led by one of their greatest generals and strategists, Subutai. Subutai had once served under Genghis Khan and now under Ogedei. He came from humble origins, yet his extraordinary achievements had elevated him to the top of the Mongol command structure. Together with several other generals, Subutai led his forces through the freezing snow to invade Russia. Thanks to the incredible endurance of their troops, the Mongols crushed the powerful Russian armies and captured the great city of Kiev in 1240. Next came Poland, Hungary, and Romania. No European knight could withstand the speed and precision of Mongol cavalry and their devastating arrows. As Europe braced itself for what seemed to be an unstoppable invasion, some kingdoms began sending envoys in desperate attempts to negotiate peace. But then, unexpectedly, the great Khan Ogedei died, reportedly due to alcoholism. According to Mongol tradition, all leaders across the empire were required to return home for the election of the next great Khan. And because of this, Europe was spared from complete conquest. The death of Ogedei effectively halted the Mongol advance into Europe and the Near East, saving countless kingdoms from falling under Mongol rule. Succession to the title of Great Khan was not automatically granted to the eldest son. Instead, it opened the door for brothers, uncles, and cousins to compete for leadership, often with the support of senior widows who acted as regents for their sons. By the 1260s, the grandsons of Genghis Khan were locked in a civil war that eventually split the once mighty Mongol Empire into 4 separate khanates. This was strikingly similar to what happened after the death of Alexander the Great, whose empire also fractured due to the lack of a clear succession plan, leading to its eventual downfall. A brutal massacre took place in Karakoram, the Mongol capital, marking the beginning of this great division. The death of Ogedei had revealed the deep ambitions and rivalries among Mongol nobility, and within just a few years, the struggle for the title of Great Khan erupted into continuous conflict. These internal battles brought about the first signs of instability within the once unified empire. By 1271, the Mongol realm was officially divided into 4 major khanates. The Yuan Dynasty, founded by Kublai Khan, ruled over China and Korea and became known as a golden age of science and culture. The Chagatai Khanate, founded by Chagatai, the second son of Genghis Khan, controlled territory in northern Afghanistan. From this lineage would later emerge powerful leaders such as Tamerlane, Timur, and his descendant Babur, who would go on to found the Mughal Empire in India. The Golden Horde, established by Batu Khan, controlled much of Russia and Hungary. It ruled for centuries until a small trading outpost named Muscovy eventually rose to become a global power, the foundation of modern Russia. The Ilkhanate, founded in Persia by Hulagu Khan, fostered the growth of monumental architecture and the beautiful tradition of Persian miniature painting. Thus, while the Mongol Empire had once united nearly all of Eurasia under a single rule, its internal divisions marked the beginning of its slow fragmentation, transforming one vast empire into 4 great but independent realms. For years, disagreements among Mongol leaders continued to weaken the empire. Eventually, one of Genghis Khan's grandsons, Kublai Khan, defeated his younger brother's forces and claimed the title of Great Khan of the Mongol Empire. Kublai's reign marked a turning point in Mongol history. In theory, Kublai Khan ruled an empire stretching from China and Korea all the way to Iran and southern Russia. But the diversity and distance of the conquered lands were beginning to show. Kublai started to see himself more as a Chinese emperor than a Mongol Khan. Similarly, other Mongol territories began to drift away from traditional steppe customs and adopt the local cultures and religions, particularly Islam and Buddhism. In Kublai's case, his transformation from a steppe warlord into a Chinese emperor was symbolized by the relocation of his capital to Beijing in 1260, which he began rebuilding in 1267. Mongolia was no longer the true center of power, not even within Kublai's own realm. Kublai Khan eventually conquered the last remaining Chinese territories still resisting Mongol domination, becoming the first foreign ruler to govern all of China. However, his later years were plagued by rebellions and political conspiracies. His vast administration struggled to maintain stability, and uprisings broke out across his empire. Seeking to expand further, Kublai turned his eyes toward Japan, assembling a massive naval invasion fleet to conquer the islands. But nature had other plans. A powerful typhoon struck the Japanese seas, destroying much of the Mongol armada and killing thousands of troops. Undeterred, in 1281, Kublai launched a second invasion. This time, the Japanese navy was prepared and successfully blocked the Mongol fleet's advance. Those few Mongol ships that managed to reach Japan's shores were swiftly defeated by the samurai. These failed invasions delivered a devastating blow to Kublai Khan's power and prestige. His weakening rule allowed rebellions and breakaway kingdoms to rise across the empire. The most successful of these rebel leaders was Zhu Yanzhang, a former monk born into a poor peasant family. Through determination, strategy, and military skill, he gradually consolidated power, eliminated his rivals, and seized control of key economic regions. By 1368, Zhu had driven the Mongols out of Beijing and proclaimed himself emperor of a new dynasty, the Ming Dynasty, taking the reign title Hongwu. Under his rule, power spread once again across northern China. The last Mongol emperor, Togun Timur, fled back to the Mongolian steppe and died there in 1370, marking the end of more than a century of Mongol rule over China. Meanwhile, the rulers of Chagatai, on several occasions, sent their armies through Afghanistan into India. This was mainly because, on all other borders, relatively stable nations prevented any policy of aggression. That made the south the only promising direction for expansion. For decades, the Mongols remained a dangerous enemy to the Muslim sultans of Delhi. The Mongol invasions from Afghanistan became increasingly fierce under the rule of Dua Khan, and the Delhi Sultanate barely managed to defend its capital from Chagatai expeditionary forces. The situation of Islam under Chagatai rule remained unstable, even though some of the earlier Khans had converted to Islam. After a brief period of internal stability between the years 1301 and 1325, Khan Tarma Shurin once again embraced Islam in 1326. This decision caused a temporary split between the eastern and western parts of his Khanate. Some sources even claim that Tarma Shurin was killed under the influence of Buddhist and shamanist factions because of his conversion to Islam. Under the rule of Tughlaq Timur in 1347, the Khanate was reunited once again. However, most of his successors were little more than figureheads. The true power lay in the hands of Emir Timur, better known as Tamerlane. He continued the Chagatai rule even though he himself was not a Mongol. The influence of the Chagatai Turkic language became particularly strong during the 14th century, though the Mongolian language was still used as the official language in the Turfan region until 1369. Under Timur's reign, the Chagatai Khanate ceased to be a Mongol empire and transformed into an Islamic-oriented Chagatai state. From the very beginning, Hulagu found himself in a unique political situation as a result of the religious tendencies among Mongol rulers in Iran. Hulagu's hostility toward Islam and his attack on the caliphate caused a split with the Golden Horde in southern Russia, where Berk, the brother of Batu, had converted to Islam. Meanwhile, the Ilkhans in Iran initially remained loyal allies of Kublai Khan in China, while Berk supported Kublai's rival rebels who had risen against him. Hulagu also maintained his enmity toward Egypt, the main Islamic power in the Near East, which naturally led to an alliance between Berk and the Mamluks of Egypt. For the first time in history, a Mongol ruler allied himself with a foreign power against other Mongols. Even the European powers became involved in this political constellation. The Christian states of Tripoli and Acre, established by the Crusaders, were under the protection of the Pope and the kings of France. It's no surprise, then, that Rome and Paris viewed the Ilkhans as potential allies against Islamic Egypt. Under the growing influence of Islam, the assimilation of the Mongols into Iranian civilization became increasingly apparent. Several later Khans even adopted Islamic titles. For example, Olayatu proclaimed himself Sultan rather than Khan. His son and heir, Abu Sa'id, was the first of the Ilkhanid rulers to bear a Muslim name. Since he was only 12 years old when he ascended the throne in 1317, real power largely remained in the hands of local emirs. This was followed by 2 decades of internal conflict and gradual disintegration. When Abu Sa'id died without an heir in 1335, the Ilkhanate effectively ceased to exist as a unified political entity. In the Ulus of Batu, the situation for a long time was dominated by hostility toward the Ilkhanate Empire. For more than a century, the rulers of the Golden Horde, or the Kipchak Khanate, sought to occupy the Caucasus and advance into Iran. This led to an anti-Persian alliance with Egypt. Economically, relations between the Golden Horde and Egypt flourished. A prosperous maritime trade connected the two regions, transporting goods between their ports. Artisans and craftsmen from Egypt came to the royal court at Sarai Batu, along the Volga River, bringing with them Egyptian influence that became evident in much of the art and architecture of the Golden Horde Empire. The religious situation, however, was quite different from that in Iran. Although both Mongol empires eventually converted to Islam, which encouraged the assimilation between Turkic and Mongol peoples, in Iran, Islam had originally been the faith of the conquered population. At the same time, Nestorian Christianity and Buddhism remained powerful rivals. In southern Russia, however, Nestorianism never played a major role, and Buddhism was virtually non-existent. This religious vacuum made the acceptance of Islam much easier, and the traditional Mongol shamanism was soon replaced by the new faith. Nevertheless, the Khans showed tolerance toward the Orthodox Church of their Russian subjects. Under Mengu Timur in 1267, Berk's successor, the Golden Horde became almost entirely independent from the great Khan Kublai in Beijing. Under Khan Uzbek in 1312, the political power of the Khanate reached its peak, and Islamic culture flourished under this energetic ruler, whose name still lives on today in Uzbekistan. Later, the Horde faced new challenges on its borders when the Ottomans reached the Dardanelles in 1354. This not only weakened their maritime ties with Egypt but also cut off the Khanate from the Mediterranean, and therefore from southern Europe. In this growing isolation, the Khans continued to launch several campaigns toward the south. The last undisputed ruler of the Golden Horde was Toktamish. He united his forces with those of the White Horde, a confederation of tribes in western Siberia descended from Orda. Toktamish also renewed the privileges of the princes of Moscow, but soon he encountered a new enemy, Timur, also known as Tamerlane. Timur's campaign into southern Russia brought no lasting conquest, but it severely weakened the political and military power of the Horde. The later history of the Mongols, or more precisely, the Tatars, in Russia followed a similar path to that of other Islamic Mongol states. Wealth followed by internal strife, disintegration, and eventually division into independent kingdoms. Meanwhile, the Principality of Moscow rose as a great power, and the history of the Tatars gradually became part of the history of Russia itself. The Mongol Empire officially came to an end around the year 1368. Most of the Mongol people returned to their homeland, resuming their nomadic way of life, wandering once again across the vast steppes. Even today, many still live simply, holding on to the ancient traditions of their Mongol ancestors. The impact of the Mongol campaigns went far beyond the destruction of sacred civilizations like Khwarezm or the Tangut kingdom. Every land they conquered underwent deep social, ethnic, and linguistic transformations under Mongol rule. Yet, on the other hand, Mongol imperialism during the 13th and 14th centuries helped bridge the East and the West. Countless elements of material culture were exchanged between Asia and Europe. Ideas, art, technology, and trade flowed more freely than ever before. For a time, the world was more connected than it had ever been. This era of exchange inspired Europe's age of exploration, driven by the desire to reach the wondrous eastern lands described by travelers like Marco Polo, who had journeyed through the Mongol Empire. The story of the Mongols continues to live on, a legacy born of ambition, resilience, and unshakable belief. Though their empire was brief, the Mongols left behind a mark of global dominance unlike anything the world has ever seen. Thank you.